Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Ian Mackey. I am excited to have with me here Jamie Aline, our Director of Display, who is going to walk us through the mysterious world of programmatic campaigns and display buying. I'm sure most of you have heard at this point, this has been a really hot channel the last, I don't know, 6 months, year, maybe a little bit longer. A lot of technological changes, a lot of stuff that Jamie is going to walk through. But most importantly, our goal is to provide 30 to 40 minutes of sort of input, tips, advice that you can take back with you, impress your boss, whatever that may be. So before we get started, though, just a few logistics. The webinar is being recorded, and a link will be emailed usually within 24, 48 hours, pending any technical difficulties. Definitely feel free to ask any questions during the webinar via the chat option. And of course, we will get back to everyone or any unanswered questions following the webinar. We're always available. You can reach out to myself or Jamie if you find that you have questions after the fact. So first, a little bit about Pointit. We were founded in 2002. We're a Seattle-based digital marketing agency focusing across various service levels and verticals. Our focus on SEM, SEO and display, as well as web and landing page development, a lot of paid social advertising and mobile app marketing as well. Again, service clients across all verticals and revenue models, e-commerce, lead gen, B2B, B2C, you name it, and we've done it. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Jamie and let her take it from there.
Thanks, Ian. This is just kind of a high-level overview of what we're going to cover today. First, I want to take a look at the marketing funnel. We're going to kind of use that to evaluate your current campaigns, make sure that you're maximizing your coverage. Then I want to talk about 3 tactics that are available through programmatic buying that you should be using right now if you're not already. And finally, I'd like to leave you with some optimization tips. Just some kind of out-of-the-box optimization ideas to make sure that you're considering the strategic direction for your display program. So first, we'll kind of do an intro of what is programmatic. Hopefully most of you guys have either heard the buzzword or are aware of what it means, maybe running some campaigns right now. The way that we see programmatic buying is really as a centralized control panel. What it does is it allows us access to the open exchanges. It allows us access to data, to layering on targeting tactics, leveraging new technology that's available. So for today's webinar, we're going to be specifically focusing on programmatic as it applies to the buying of ads through exchanges, and that could be through a full service DSP, maybe you're working with a vendor, or maybe you're running campaigns through a self-service DSP. And just to kind of clear up another one of those buzzwords in the programmatic space, programmatic includes real-time bidding, which is that auction environment, but for today's webinar, we're also going to kind of include non-real-time bidding as programmatic as well, which is also a piece of running campaigns programmatically.
Yeah, and so before we get started and start jumping into the good stuff, we want to take a really quick poll to get a sense of where folks are at, and just a general understanding of how people use programmatic currently, if they do at all. So if you could take a really quick few seconds here, choose one of these 3 options, try and get a sense of maybe we can tailor some of the presentation one way or the other. The goal is just to get a kind of an understanding of where folks are at with programmatic and display. And as we're waiting for people to fill out the questionnaire, Jamie, would you consider like Google Display Network programmatic buying?
Good question. Yes, I would consider it programmatic buying. It is purchased in an auction environment. It is considered real-time bidding. The Google Display Network that's associated with AdWords campaigns is considered a network. So it is Google properties. It can also include the DoubleClick Exchange inventory. So in a sense, it's a little, you access it a little differently, but I would certainly loop it into running campaigns programmatically.
Okay, thanks a lot. So yeah, so as expected, we have about kind of a split between, it being a core marketing channel versus those who are still working through their Blu-ray player. I was going to put VCR, but I figured that would date myself a little bit. So so we'll go ahead. We'll go ahead and move on and get back to the presentation.
Awesome. So this next slide is just a look at, okay, what is the marketing funnel? This is just a way to look at how are we evaluating our campaigns. So hopefully this looks familiar. Retargeting is at the bottom of the funnel. Then once you kind of move up to a broader audience, you've layered on the behavioral and contextual audiences. And then finally at the top layer, you have your broadest audience, your untargeted, running pure prospecting campaigns. That usually entails using very aggressive goals to maintain some sort of level of efficiency. So when I look at the marketing channel and I'm evaluating campaigns, I definitely want to start from the bottom up. The point of expanding your marketing programs really is to make sure that you've satisfied your retargeting pool. From there, then you want to focus on layering on additional tactics. So if you go on to the next slide, why and where might you want to make changes? Well, let's say that you've started with your retargeting campaigns. It's your known audience, your high converters, it's working really well for you. But are you oversaturating that audience? Are you pooling all of your investments into the bottom of the funnel? Ways that you can evaluate that are through frequency cap, conversion lag, understanding that retargeted audience. What you want to uncover is at what point is my retargeting audience sort of oversaturated? Once you hit that level, that additional investment should be rolled into the higher level approaches, whether that be the behavioral, contextual, going after an audience that you would imagine would be your target audience using third-party data, and that, in addition to prospecting, can help feed your retargeting pool. The idea is that you want to make sure that you're increasing your unique users to your site after you've made sure that you have coverage on your retargeted audience. All right, so next I kind of want to go over some benefits of programmatic buying before I get into our tactics. One of the reasons we love using programmatic buying is that it gives you access to nearly unlimited inventory. And it sort of changes the display buying game from buying based on inventory, like going to CNN.com and buying inventory directly on their site. But instead you're targeting a user, whether they be on CNN.com or weather.com or ESPN.com. It allows you to reach them wherever they're at and not make assumptions about where they might be. And also is leveraging automated tools and machine learning technology to really quickly try to understand where your users are going to be and to optimize really efficiently. But I think if if programmatic buying is so marvelous, then why aren't more advertisers using it? There's certainly a lot of cons that come with opening yourself up to that broad internet audience. These are some of the ways or some of the barriers to entry that we found for advertisers in switching over their campaigns to programmatic. There's definitely the fear of a loss of control, losing transparency, fraudulent traffic, and of course that fear of a negative brand association, not knowing whether or not your ad would be showing up next to undesirable content, making your brand look bad. How do you control that?
Would you say another barrier is potentially cost in terms of minimums, or if you only have $10K or $5,000 versus $50,000, $75,000. Is that potentially a barrier?
It definitely can be. Depending on the way that you approach programmatic buying, I think it definitely does take a minimum to make sure that you're testing it appropriately. And occasionally when you're using a full service DSP, they will have minimums in place. So yeah, I would say that the cost is definitely a barrier to entry too. Good point.
And not to plug the agency, but oftentimes, because we manage so many accounts, our minimums can be a lot lower.
Yes. Okay, so the next three topics are tactics that I think will kind of help mitigate some of those barriers to entry. The first is, how do we get around the brand safety issue? Luckily, publishers and vendors are coming up with solutions to try to help advertisers lose that fear of their brand being safe out there in the internet. So the solution is this brand safety tactic. It's basically, kind of a sniffer. There are companies out there that go out and sort of explore the internet, try to understand the content on pages, and aggregate that and group pages and placements into unsafe categories that allow you to exclude those from your campaigns. Generally, this can either be rolled into your CPM costs if you're using a full-service DSP, or in some cases it may be a slight addition to your CPM costs. I think it's generally very easy to implement, and I've found it's always worth it to add that additional layer to our campaigns to ensure that our campaigns, our advertisers, are showing only on the safest sites out there. There are definitely different levels too that you can customize those brand safety tactics. So definitely ask your vendor about what they have available, so you can make sure that you're taking advantage of it.
And this probably doesn't matter across devices, right? The vendor should have, whether you're running mobile campaigns, desktop campaigns, potentially be able to come up with some sort of brand safety standards.
Sure, yeah, they should be able to come up with solutions for you. So the next, the next fear is, where is my ad showing? Is it fraudulent traffic? Is it really being viewed by a human? When you open yourself up again to the internet audience, there is definitely a fear that you lose control over where your ad is showing. So there's another tactic I recommend looking into. It's viewability. It's basically, again, similar to the brand safety tactic. You would add it on sort of like a third-party data, like you would add on a behavioral tactic. So it basically is targeting viewable placements. And again, there are companies out there that are searching the internet that are trying to understand at the placement level, is this ad likely to be viewed by a human, and how likely is it to be viewed? And it could mean that it is above the fold. It could mean that on that particular page, it's very likely that a user would be scrolling down and would view your ad maybe below the fold. It again kind of groups placements into an available targeting tactic, and you would apply it to your campaigns. It's definitely worth testing. Again, it can come at an additional cost. If you're using a full-service DSP, I would ask your vendor to see what they have available, but it's certainly worth testing if it's efficient. Is it worth bidding a little higher to make sure that your placements are viewable? Does that make sense for your business? Is that efficient according to your KPIs? Certainly worth testing. One of the limitations, though, is that not every site is going to be crawled. Not every site is going to fit into one of those buckets. So it can limit your volume when you're targeting only a certain number of placements. So I'd recommend running it as maybe a smaller test, or just sort of an add-on for a short amount of time to see if it's worth applying it to the rest of your campaigns. So the last tactic I want to go over is experiments. I think it's important to always be trying to better understand your campaigns, and one of the ways you can do that is through running experiments. First, you start by setting your objective, and normally that comes with a question. So what is a business rule you're trying to figure out? Am I wasting money on retargeting, like we talked about before, when you're looking at your marketing funnel critically? Maybe it's how much credit should I give to view-based conversions? Or what is the optimal frequency cap? Those are all questions that can be answered through running experiments. So the next step would be, once you've designed your question, then you want to set up your experiment. In the display environment, it can be a little tricky to make sure that you're running a clean test. When we split up into experiment buckets or groups, you definitely want to make sure that you're doing this at the user level. So oftentimes your DSP or your vendor will have ways to split up the unique users that they see into experiment buckets, and you can decide how you want each of those buckets to be put into an experiment, whether it be 3 different buckets, see 3 different frequency caps, or something like that. You definitely want to make sure in some cases that you have an exposed group or an unexposed group, and try to keep that as clean as possible. If you can, I recommend kind of fleshing out your current campaigns maybe for 2 to 4 weeks before you run an experiment to make sure that you're starting new. That's not always possible, but if you can, definitely recommend it. And the point of running these experiments is that after you've run them, you want to collect all of your data and you want to measure lift.
So a couple questions here that I know are going to come up is, for search, for social, we tend to run tests generally for as long as it takes to get enough data. Any sort of recommendations, benchmarks on how long these experiments should be running, how long these tests need to run before we can have some conclusive results?
I'm going to give the answer that nobody wants to hear. It depends. I think if I have to give a benchmark, I'd say, depending on your volume, probably between 2 to 4 weeks is a good length of time to run your experiments. Oftentimes, you can kind of measure that against the length of a cookie, which is 30 days. So I think a 30-day experiment is probably a good starting point.
Yeah, and I think it's probably worth mentioning too that to not forget, so say you run an experiment, a test, display campaign, whatever it is, in the event when it's stopped, to another week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks later to kind of look at that data to see if there's any latent conversions. I just know that we're seeing this with some social campaigns that we're running. We're actually going back, kind of campaigns that we sort of forgot about, and we're looking back at analytics and finding that went from a barely breaking even to now being ROI positive. And I imagine display being oftentimes an awareness channel, that could definitely be the case.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely something you want to consider. Latent conversions are definitely going to be a factor in your results. So depending on your look-back windows that you've applied to your conversion pixels, I would wait that length of time to make sure that any latent conversions can be attributed to that test.
So a question came in that I was going to save till the end, but might as well jump on it right now. In terms of the view-based conversions, what's the process for setting up a test like that?
Great question. This is certainly something I could probably spend another webinar talking about fully, but from a high-level kind of simplified point of view, we talked about setting up different buckets. Basically what you want to do is you want to set up a bucket that's exposed and not exposed. And what that's going to leave you with is, what of the audience that isn't exposed to my ad, how many of them we're going to convert anyway? And that's really the question we're trying to ask about view conversions. How many of them are directly correlated to my campaign? So chances are you'll run maybe 2 groups, an exposed group and an unexposed group for a certain amount of time, and then at the end of the campaign you would measure the lift between those two audiences. So it wouldn't be the, whatever the exposed group sees in terms of, let's say, conversion or revenue. It would be the difference between the unexposed group and the exposed group.
Okay,
so actually
sure.
this next slide kind of has a visual. So in this case, you would take the test bucket 2 might be the unexposed group. The test bucket 1 would be exposed, and you would measure the difference, and that would be that would kind of give you a modifier for how you would apply that to your view revenue. For example, say you can only take credit for a certain percentage because your unexposed group was already going to drive a certain percentage of that revenue anyway.
Okay, yeah, that definitely makes sense.
Yeah, so this is an example, as a just to kind of take a look at how we would set this up for if you're measuring, what's the optimal frequency cap. You'd split it up into 3 buckets, and as I mentioned before, you'd measure the lift or the delta between 2 of the buckets, and that would give you the actual impact of your campaigns. I definitely recommend a couple KPIs to measure your performance against. Oftentimes when you're splitting up buckets, especially if they're exposed or unexposed or a retargeted audience or untargeted, I think that it's important to use impression volume in your metric because that sort of normalizes the data. When you include cost, that can greatly vary depending on the size of your audience, if there's any targeting that you're having to bid up for. I recommend using revenue per impression or conversion rate per impression to evaluate the campaigns.
So this question was going to come up. Any recommendations on the optimal frequency cap?
Yeah, good question. So if I could kind of take you back to the marketing funnel, my answers would differ for each of the different levels. I recommend a higher frequency cap for a retargeted bucket, at least to start. So maybe, I think we're pretty conservative with our frequency caps before we start opening them up, but maybe the 7 to 10 per day for a retargeted audience. Then once you move into the behavioral and contextual audiences, I probably go for a 5 per day. And then once you get into prospecting, you could certainly start with a higher frequency cap like 5 per day, but if you're trying to increase your unique users, I'd recommend going something lower than that, like 3 per day is probably a good place to start.
Yeah, okay.
All right, so we're going to move on into some of the optimization tips I want to talk with you guys today. These are, they're not your typical bidding strategy optimization tips. They're more, from a strategic standpoint, how can you make sure that you're looking at your campaigns critically to stay ahead of the competition, maybe thinking a little outside the box. One of the tips I have for today is the use of whitelists and blacklists. Any DSP that you're using should have an ability to target certain domains. A whitelist includes certain domains. A blacklist can exclude those domains. So if you start thinking about your audience and your campaigns, I try to think about where is my audience spending time online. A good example might be a developer audience. Maybe they spend time looking at developer forums or troubleshooting sites or coding sites. And it can be fairly easy to kind of collect those top sites with a quick search and compile a list of domains that you can try targeting. And more often than not, you'll be able to find that those domains are opted into the open exchanges, and without having to go directly to those publishers, you can access that inventory directly from a DSP. It's a really good way to get really specific about the audience that you're going after. On the other hand, there's blacklists. So that kind of gives you a way to refine your audience. I like to pull a domain report probably every month. It can be a little bulky. It's definitely a lot of information to sift through. But usually I will sort that list by high cost, low return sites. And that can usually give me a quick snapshot of, are there any domains that I should be excluding that are driving up costs for the advertiser and not generating any return. So I can quickly add those to a blacklist and start making sure that I'm refining the traffic. Now the next tip I have for you guys is just to lean on your vendors. If you're aware of the display industry, you know that it's very fragmented. There are new technology companies popping up all the time, and that can be really exciting, but it's also really tough to stay ahead of. So I would recommend, ask your vendors, what are they excited about that their DSP is rolling out in the coming months? What am I not using in my campaigns that I should be? What features are you really excited about? That is a really good way and a fast way to make sure that you're taking advantage of the technology that's emerging. Now the last one is, again, sort of, thinking outside of the box, thinking about overall strategy. If you're not already, definitely start looking into competitive analysis tools. I like to make sure that I'm understanding how and where my competitors are advertising, not just in the display channel, but also across channels. What is their marketing mix? Where are there areas that I can excel in that they're not already? What types of sites are referring them traffic that I could be advertising on? Maybe add that to a whitelist. I've listed a few vendors that I like using. The other thing I like to look at is what messaging my competitors are using. Am I in line with that messaging? Have they thought of something I haven't? Is there a benefit I could talk about that they're not talking about? It kind of gets you thinking about your strategy at a higher level, kind of step away from your campaigns and make sure that you're being really strategic about how you're approaching them.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine that this is a pretty underutilized sort of tool or tactic, is just trying to get a good picture of what is your competitors are doing, seeing, actually looking at their banners, looking at the placements. I know because I think it's just been accepted that it's like, oh, your competitors' ads are probably out there, but you really don't know where or when or what they look like, unless you just happen to see them as a retargeted banner once you visit their site. But yeah, no, I think it's great that we bring this up. It's just, it's no different than search, social, the other channels is, what is it that our competitors are doing? And the more that we know and the more that we can see and understand, the more, if necessary, we can the steps we can take to compete more effectively against them.
Yeah, absolutely. I will just leave you with one final slide here, your cheat sheet for the day. Just to kind of wrap things up, in review, if what you can go back and do today, take a look at where your campaigns fall in the marketing funnel. Make sure that you're starting at the bottom and not oversaturating your retargeting pool. And any additional investment that you can roll into those higher funnel approaches, I think will really help you get the most bang for your buck. And also, these are some questions you could email your vendors today. That kind of wraps up, some of the tactics that you should be using, some of the optimization ideas. So feel free to copy and paste this into the body of an email and send that over today.
Well, awesome. Thank you very much, Jamie. Hopefully everyone was able to take away some good action items. Basically, she gave you some some emails right here that you could send over to them to start taking some of these steps. So we did want to open it up to questions. See a few coming through here. Kind of going back to the viewability piece. So, and I believe you mentioned this, but maybe just to confirm it, is there an added cost to that, I guess that's a targeting segment?
Right. There is an added cost. Will you see that? Maybe not. It sort of depends on your vendor. Oftentimes those can get rolled into your campaigns if you're using a full service DSP. They would just absorb that cost into your CPMs. If you're using a self-service DSP, that may be something that you would have to add on as an additional CPM. I wouldn't expect that it would be anything significant, probably under 50 cents per for CPM. So it'd be a lot less than like a behavioral segment.
Okay. Another question on lists, white and black lists. Are there any tools for creating these lists, or is this something that you just have to sort of lean on the vendor to provide?
Good question. I think when I approach lists, I generally, I kind of manually go after them. Oftentimes it's searching online, top 10 gamers sites or developer forums, something like that. I would think there's probably some, within AdWords, they have a placement tool. You could probably kind of couple in some targeting, some of their targeting topics and keywords to look for potential domains that you could target. That might be a good tool to use, but other than that, there's not a great tool to use. Sometimes, I'll look at different places like referring traffic of our competitors. Those can be good domains to go after, or even domains that have performed well based on reports that I've pulled.
Yeah, and I suppose an analytics tool platform like GA will have domains within the referral report that you can kind of look at to get a sense of how things are performing.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be a really great place to look for ideas.
Okay, well, we will go ahead and we're going to wrap this up, and we'll go ahead, again, definitely email us if you have any additional questions. We will get the recording uploaded to our website, and within the next day or two, email out the deck as well as the recording. So again, thank you very much everybody, and have a fantastic day.